I guess not necessarily green screen replacement, but it's an addition to it, and it provides a new way of shooting this type of stuff. I'd love to hear about it.
The LED volume is a large circular room or space around about 75 foot in diameter circle, almost a complete circle, with a ceiling at around about 20 feet tall, and that's all LED panels. A very tight pitch LED panels, so that if you've got the correct focal math on the lens and you're not focused on the lens but on the wall, but you're focused on the characters in the foreground, you don't see the moire or the pixels on the screen. So it's an immersive environment with 3D tracking of images on the back. It's basically a modern version of rear screen projection. It's a dynamic real-time photoreal background that's played on a massive LED wall, and by tracking the camera, we get parallax and perspective. So it's a massively complicated, incredibly complicated technical setup to track the camera and to display this live image on the ground. But what it means is that we can be in Iceland in the morning and on a beach in Hawaii in the afternoon.
And what is it called?
It doesn't really have a name. We call it the volume. It's
LED volume?
It's an LED wall, and we call it a volume because a volume was the traditional name for a stage space where motion capture was taken out. So we're actually this is not motion capture because we're photographing live. It's a combination of live foreground with this dynamic photoreal background that's on the screen. So it's like live green screen or live rear projection basically would be the best comparison, but rear projection was only usable from one spot, one nodal spot, because everything else would have the wrong parallax or wrong perspective. So if we have a dynamically adjustable background, we can move the camera and the background tracks with the camera. So therefore we have a live tracked background that we can photograph.
That's amazing. So what were your tracking points? Did you have tracking points on the screen?
No, there's a large number of motion capture cameras all around, but most of them are along the edge between the ceiling and the wall, and they were tracking a crown that was mounted on the camera that had, I can't remember, 5 or 6 IR infrared tracking nodes. And so whatever the camera did went up or down or tilted forward, up and down, or tracked left and right, as well as knowing what the lens information was, because it was live lens information tracking. The image could be photographed on the wall because it was totally in relation to what was coming from the camera.
So the image that's on that LED panel, that's not being replaced. It is, well, I guess I'm saying it like I know what I'm talking about. I'm asking that as a question. Is it being replaced and it's just there for reference, or is what you're seeing on the LED panel the finished image?
The main goal was to have in-camera finals. So that means so to get to this point, I need to really back up. What we need to do is that in the art department, Andrew Jones, the production designer, would create these virtual environments that were either based upon photogrammetry, which we found to be very successful, or completely CG environments. And so Andrew Jones and his virtual art department would work with ILM's virtual art department, and they would create these environments that we could then put through all of ILM's process for us to be able to photograph inside the volume. So we would have to create these environments. We would have to then light these environments. We would have to work out how we were going to shoot those environments.
Okay, so those weren't were they practical environments or were they digital environments that you just helped manipulate the lighting in?
It would depend upon what the location was.
Okay.
Sometimes, if it was a village, or if it was something that required a lot of CG creation, in no matter what the environment was, whether it was the black sandy desert of Navarro or the mud planet of Arvala with the Trandoshans attacking Mando at the beginning of episode 2, or the village in episode 4. Or the best one to describe is actually the hangar, what we call the roost hangar for episode 6. So the roost hangar was a space that might have been around about 300 feet, 280 feet long. In a virtual sense, this is how big it was. About 280 feet long, and it was about 70 feet, 60 feet wide. So, and the Razor Crest comes in at the beginning of the episode and flies in through the force barrier and lands inside this aircraft hangar deck, basically.
Okay.
So we had 3 volumes that for that whole length of that virtual set. So when Mando got out of the ship and then started walking towards the back of the hangar, we first walked through the first load or volume, and then we shot whatever we needed to do in that first volume, and then we would change the volume on the wall, change the load on the volume wall to be the second load, not in a continuous sense. These had to play in cuts, obviously, and then we would walk through the second one, and then when we got to the third one, that was a third volume within that same volumetric area, that CG volumetric area. Whether it was an exterior set where I could move the sun around and put the sun wherever I wanted, or it was an interior set where I could build lights and put lights wherever they would be in a digital sense. Greg and I would light all of these environments, and then ILM would basically create them to the level of computing complexity that they needed to be, and then they would come back and we would run them through all the computers to put them up on the wall in the volume.
That's amazing. So I want to make sure I'm understanding it right. So the production designer would work with ILM. They'd create the sets, and then you guys would go in and light the sets virtually with ILM. And then they would kind of bring you these dynamic trackable sets to your volume, your LED volume that we're calling it. And that was basically that's how you were shooting? Am I getting that right?
That's right. And we did a very large portion of the film, of the project, inside this LED volume.
So when you're monitoring this, does it look the way that we see it when we watch it on our own TVs?
Pretty much.
That's amazing.
Pretty much. Because we're shooting on the Alexa LFs, we're shooting digitally, so we can see what we're getting, and so the point is that you want to get the finished quality of. We didn't really feel like, although we did do a DI, we did do dailies, obviously, with a dailies grade and then a DI. Still the goal is whenever you're shooting on set that you get as close to what your final release image would be on set.
Back in 2014, we had Tim Weber, who was the visual effects supervisor for Gravity, on the show. And he was talking about, I guess a lot of the scenes were shot similarly with the LED panels, but they weren't using the LED panels for finished look. They were still being replaced in post. They were using it so that the light sources were realistic and it wasn't filled with green bleed.
Exactly. So yeah, that was obviously one of our goals, was that to create an environment that was lit correctly by the LED panels, especially with color science applied by the color science engineers at ILM, because the difference between something that emits yellow and something that then records yellow needs to be computed so that the appropriate yellow might be put through the emitter, the LED, so that the camera actually sees the correct yellow, let's say, as an example. But yeah, as a 3D lighting environment, that was one of the goals. Greg built a large volume space for Rogue One that was ostensibly just a lighting environment, but but when we were working with John Knoll from ILM, it was so dramatic. It's so fantastic, the quality of the images that they provided of the animation for the escape from Jeddah, or some of the other cockpit work when they were flying, either flying into Edu or yeah, certainly escaping from Jeddah, or when they're flying above Scarif and the X-wing pilots are flying in through the force field gate and down into Scarif. The image was so fantastic that we were really disappointed that we couldn't photograph the wall at all, because the pixels that we had, the technology for the pixels then was 9 millimeters between each pixel, so it was very big. So we explored many ways of trying to defeat that by hanging industrial size widths of shower curtain. We'd experimented with different thicknesses of shower curtain just to ever so slightly diffuse the image to defeat the pixel dimension, but it couldn't really do it. So everything was basically, whenever we saw off the foreground characters in Rogue One and we saw the background of whatever environment they were flying in, although the foreground characters were lit perfectly right, they would replace the background, essentially just matching what was on the screens that we were photographing, but with a higher quality image. So what we do now is we're 2.8 millimeter pixels on the Mandalorian. So
and you're talking about the pixels in the screens, the LED screens.
Exactly. So the pixels are much closer together. So with a combination of not focusing on the screen and the right sort of lenses, we can shoot in this environment and shoot the screens and not have them replaced later. They're actually up in camera finals.
How big are these rooms?
It's around about, well, we did a test in June to make sure the technology would work, and that was about a 30-foot diameter, 35-foot diameter volume. This volume is 75-foot in diameter and about 20 feet high. Season 2, we have a slightly larger one.
How did you feel? I mean, it's a good space, but it can be cramped at times with everybody on the frame and, you know, your whole crew there and everything. I mean, did it feel cramped at all to you?
There are challenges in regards blocking to work out how you can fit in what you need to fit into the space.
Yeah.
So you have to make a value judgment early on about the size of the space and how you're going to use it, and what is it really worth the cost, the time and money to build the virtual sets to shoot on there, because if it's not a big enough space, then you're wasting your time. So we do a lot of time, spend a lot of time in pre-production in VR, where we build all of these sets in VR, and then we scout them. So, you know, upwards of 5 or 6 people, director, producers, DP, production designer, VFX, we can scout together in these environments, and we can put up lenses and work out. It's all the same technology that Jon Favreau and Caleb Deschanel worked out with Lion King. I listened to your interview with Caleb about Lion King, and
thanks. Yeah.
I wish I could sound as astute as him, but Caleb's a genius. So we do a lot of scouting in VR, and therefore we can work out the size of the sets and the size of the volume and how things work. But we can do a lot of lensing in that environment. We can work out how far away the lenses can be or need to be. Will they fit? Will the shots that we want to execute, will they fit inside the volume? And so it's sometimes the payoff from shooting inside the volume, because it means that you can build a very small set, but by having digital set extension that's done in pre-production, you can then photograph that. You can frame for that. If there's this huge building or mountain or a horizon line, or there's a waterfall or a cliff, if you're shooting in a green screen environment and you don't have simulcam, you don't know how to frame for that. So you end up with these very sterile images that don't necessarily pay attention to what is truly happening in the background. Whereas we have this live 3D and photoreal background that we can frame for. So we maybe just raise the camera up a few inches. Now we can see the horizon line of the valley disappearing in the distance, which immediately makes the shot more appealing or conducive, or certainly even part of the storytelling.
So I've got a question. You're using these digital sets on LED panels. Do you get them? Like, are they completely in focus? And then do you make adjustments to them as you're shooting? So like, if you want the look of an 85, but you don't have the distance perhaps, are you able to make adjustments to the LED screens at the moment to adjust for the depth in the frame?
There's a few things to unpack in that question. So when you're shooting a scene, there will be most of the photographic coverage will focus on the people that are in the foreground in the scene. So whatever's in the background will be inherently out of focus. So we have the ability to adjust the amount of out of focusness on the screen. But we use these lenses from Panavision that Dan Sasaki made custom for us. They're a 1.65 squeeze anamorphic lens that uses the whole sensor on the Alexa LF that gives us a native 239. So we have a lovely widescreen, filmic widescreen feel or look, which was one of the original designs and goals to a Star Wars TV show needed to feel like a Star Wars movie. And so we wanted to shoot 239. So with these anamorphic lenses, we do get focus drop-off that's appealing and satisfactory and very filmic, and also doesn't show the technical difficulties of photographing a pixel screen at moire. Now we actually don't have. We were surprised. We thought moire was going to be a problem, but it was much less of a problem than we realized. Occasionally, when you are shooting a scene, though, if somebody stands there and points off to the town in the distance and says, "I'm going there," or something like that, you probably would focus to the town so that you could see what was going on. So we had a few little photographic tricks that we did. We either would focus nearly to the wall, nearly to the screen, but generally, if the screens had to be in focus, then they would probably be replaced later. So then we would just put a specific green screen on the LED volume in the area that we wanted to be, whether it was the whole frame or part of the frame that we wanted to drop in a photoreal image later that was not in any way compromised by pixels.
I have to find a way to get on one of these sets so I can see how this thing works, because more and more people are talking about it now, and it just seems fascinating to me.